The bridge of the Starship Harmony's light hummed with the usual sounds of a routine survey mission. Captain Vex adjusted his 3 primary eye stalks and let out what could generously be called a sigh. Well, if you could call the sound a Zilonian makes when expelling gas through their breathing slits a sigh, it sounded more like a deflating balloon having an existential crisis. "Another day, another solar system," Vex muttered, his translator converting his thoughts into the common galactic tongue. "Brix, please tell me we have something more interesting than another lifeless rock to catalog today." The ship's chief scientist, Brix, looked up from her scanning console. Her purple, gelatinous form wobbled with what might have been excitement or indigestion. With Brix's species, it was genuinely hard to tell the difference. "Actually, Captain," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone scientists use when they think they have found something worth getting excited about, "but we might have stumbled onto something rather fascinating this time." Analyst Kyra, a tall, reed-thin being from the Outer Rim colonies, turned her elongated head toward them. Her large black eyes blinked once, twice, then a third time. The third blink meant she was processing something important, or she had something stuck in her eye. Again, alien biology could be frustratingly ambiguous. "Define fascinating," Kyra said in her typically dry manner, "because your last definition of fascinating turned out to be a moon made entirely of cheese-like substances. Which I will admit was mildly interesting until we realized it was actually the galaxy's largest collection of fossilized space whale excrement." Brix's form rippled with what was definitely embarrassment this time. "This is different, I promise. Look at this." The main viewing screen flickered to life, displaying a beautiful blue and green marble suspended in the void. White clouds swirled across its surface like abstract art painted by a cosmic artist having a particularly good day. "Oh," Vex said, leaning forward in his command chair. "Oh my!" The planet was absolutely gorgeous. Not in the way that gas giants were pretty, with their violent storms and toxic atmospheres. Not like those crystal worlds that looked spectacular but would slice you into ribbons if you tried to land on them. This world looked peaceful, serene, the kind of place you might actually want to visit for a vacation. "It's got water," Brix announced, practically vibrating with enthusiasm. "Lots of it. And an atmosphere that's not trying to kill everything within a 50-light-year radius. And wait for it. Life signs." "Intelligent life?" Kyra asked, though her tone suggested she was already preparing to be disappointed. "That's what we are about to find out," Brix replied, her tentacles dancing across the control panel. "I'm initializing a full historical scan. This baby will tell us everything about this world's development over the past several million years." Vex nodded approvingly. The historical scan was standard procedure when they encountered worlds with potential intelligent life. It used advanced temporal resonance technology to peer back through time, creating a comprehensive record of a planet's biological and cultural evolution. Usually it revealed the standard pattern: primitive life forms gradually developing intelligence, creating simple tools, and maybe achieving basic spaceflight before either destroying themselves or ascending to a higher plane of existence. "Preliminary scans suggest the dominant species calls their world Earth," Kyra reported, reading from her analysis screen. "And they call themselves humans." "How wonderfully simple." "Humans," Vex repeated, testing the word. "Sounds harmless enough. What do they look like?" The screen shifted to show various images of the planet's inhabitants. Bipedal creatures with relatively small frames, no natural weapons to speak of, and what appeared to be fairly limited physical capabilities. "They are actually quite adorable," Brix commented. "Look at those tiny little appendages they use for manipulation. And their sensory organs are so small and inefficient. How do they even perceive their environment properly?" "They seem to have developed clothing and basic tools," Kyra added. "Current technological level appears to be, let me check, oh, this is interesting. They have achieved basic spaceflight and have primitive computing systems. Not bad for such physically limited creatures." "Any signs of aggressive behavior?" Vex asked. It was always important to check. The galaxy had enough problems without accidentally making contact with another warlike species. Running that analysis now, Brick said, initiating the deep historical scan. This will take a few minutes to compile several million years of data, but the preliminary results suggest a relatively peaceful species. They seem to spend most of their time growing food, creating art, and building structures. Vex settled back in his chair with satisfaction. This was shaping up to be exactly the kind of discovery that made the long, boring months of space travel worthwhile. A beautiful world inhabited by harmless, creative beings who had managed to achieve basic civilization without destroying themselves. The Galactic Council would be pleased. "You know what," he said, allowing himself a rare moment of optimism, "I have a good feeling about these humans. They might actually be candidates for peaceful first contact." As the historical scanner hummed to life, diving deep into Earth's past, none of the three aliens had any idea that they were about to discover just how catastrophically wrong their initial assessment was. The scanner's progress bar slowly filled, processing data from the most recent time periods and working backward through history. What it would reveal in the next few minutes would fundamentally change their understanding of what they were dealing with. And it would scare them in ways they never thought possible. The first ping from the historical scanner made a cheerful little sound, like a dinner bell announcing that the meal was ready. If only they had known they were about to be served a banquet of horrors. "All right, let's see what we have here," Brick said, rubbing her tentacles together with anticipation. "Starting with data from approximately 2,000 of their years ago, should give us a nice sample of their early civilization." The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at what appeared to be a massive stone amphitheater. The structure itself was actually quite impressive, showing remarkable engineering for such a primitive time period. "Oh, this is fascinating," Bricks commented. "Look at that architecture. They built this enormous stadium for, let me check the data, public entertainment. How delightfully civilized." The image shifted to show the interior of the structure, and suddenly the three aliens went very, very quiet. In the center of the arena, two humans were engaged in what could only be described as an attempt to murder each other with sharp metal objects. One of them was succeeding. Kyra said, her voice rising an octave higher than usual. "Bricks? What exactly am I looking at here?" "According to the data," Bricks replied, her gelatinous form now a distinctly queasy shade of green, "this is something called gladiatorial combat. Apparently, they would force individuals to fight to the death for the entertainment of crowds." Vex's eye stalks retracted slightly, a sure sign of distress among his species. "Entertainment? They found watching people die entertaining?" "It gets worse," Kyra said, scrolling through more data. "This wasn't some rare occurrence. They built multiple arenas like this across their empire. They called it the Roman Empire, and apparently mass public executions were a regular weekend activity." The screen shifted again, showing a different scene. This time it was a medieval battlefield, and the sight made all three aliens wish they had skipped breakfast. Humans in metal suits were enthusiastically attempting to separate each other from various body parts using an impressive array of sharp, pointed, and generally unfriendly weapons. "Those are swords," Bricks said weakly. "And those are axes. And those things that look like sharp sticks on long poles are apparently called spears. But why so many different ways to hurt each other?" Vex asked, genuinely puzzled. Surely one method would suffice if the goal was simply death? "Oh no, Captain," Kyra said, reading through the historical records with growing alarm. "Death wasn't always the goal. Sometimes they just wanted to cause maximum pain and suffering. Look at this. They had something called siege warfare where they would surround enemy cities and starve everyone inside until they surrendered or died. That's actually quite strategic," Bricks admitted reluctantly. "Terrifying but strategic." The scanner continued its work, pulling up image after image of human conflict. Viking raids, Mongol conquests, crusades, each one more elaborate and devastating than the last. "I'm starting to notice a pattern here," Vex said. his voice taking on the tone of someone who was desperately trying to remain optimistic in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. These humans seem to have a certain talent for organized violence. Talent. Kyra laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Captain, look at this data on something called the 100 Years' War. It lasted 116 years. They spent over a century fighting each other, took a brief break, then started fighting again. Maybe they just had a really serious disagreement, Brix suggested hopefully. You know, like a trade dispute that got out of hand? It was about who got to wear a hat, Kyra replied flatly. I'm sorry, what? The crown. They spent over a century killing each other over who got to wear the fancy hat and sit in the special chair. Vex felt what his species would recognize as the beginning of a migraine. Surely this is just their primitive phase. Most species go through a period of violence before achieving enlightenment. The scanner pinged again, bringing up records of something called the Mongol Empire. Oh, good, Brix said, though her tone suggested she didn't think it was good at all. Here's an empire that conquered most of their known world. Let's see, they controlled an area of… Wait, this can't be right. 24 million square kilometers? How many people lived in that area? Vex asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know. Approximately 100 million, Kyra replied. And according to these records, the Mongols may have been responsible for reducing the global human population by 11%. 11% of their entire species? Vex's voice cracked. That's not war, that's practically extinction-level carnage. And they did it with horses and arrows, Brix added, her form now trembling slightly. Horses and arrows, Captain. Imagine what they could do with actual technology. The screen continued to cycle through images. Ancient Chinese warfare with elaborate siege engines, Japanese samurai with their terrifyingly efficient swordsmanship, and European knights in heavy armor designed specifically for the purpose of not dying while trying to kill other people. I'm seeing a disturbing trend in their technological development, Kyra observed. Every major innovation seems to have been immediately applied to more efficient ways of ending lives. Well, that's probably just coincidence, Vex said, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. They invented metallurgy primarily to make better weapons, Kyra continued. They developed mathematics to calculate projectile trajectories. They created complex organizational systems specifically for managing armies. Chemistry for explosives, engineering for siege engines, logistics for supply lines, Brix added, her scientific mind cataloging the data despite her growing horror. Captain, these beings didn't just stumble into violence. They systematically perfected it. Vex stared at the screen, where medieval humans were demonstrating something called a trebuchet, which appeared to be designed for throwing very large rocks at very high speeds at things you wanted to stop existing. Perhaps, he said slowly, this is just their ancient history. Surely they have outgrown such primitive behavior by now. I mean, look at their current state. They have achieved space flight. They must have evolved beyond this. The scanner beeped cheerfully, indicating it had compiled enough data to move forward to more recent time periods. Well, Brix said, her voice barely above a whisper, I suppose there's only one way to find out. None of them realized that what they had seen so far would soon seem quaint and civilized compared to what humanity had accomplished with a few more centuries of technological advancement. The scanner's next ping sounded different somehow, less cheerful, more ominous, like the universe itself was trying to warn them about what they were about to witness. Data compilation complete for the period they called the 20th century, Kyra announced, though her usual professional tone had developed a slight tremor. Initiating display sequence now. The screen filled with an image that made all three aliens sit up straighter. It showed massive industrial facilities, towering smokestacks, and what appeared to be the most advanced manufacturing capabilities they had yet seen from the humans. Well, this is more like it, Vex said, relief evident in his voice. Look at that industrial development. They have clearly evolved into a more civilized, production-oriented society. Let me check what they were producing, Brix said, accessing the manufacturing data. Her gelatinous form went completely still. Oh no. What? Kyra asked, leaning forward. They were manufacturing weapons, Brix whispered. Industrial-scale weapons production. Captain, they took everything they learned about mass manufacturing and applied it to making tools of war. The screen shifted to show what the humans called the Western Front during their First World War. The sight that greeted them defied everything the aliens thought they knew about the limits of violence. Endless trenches stretched across entire continents, filled with millions of humans pointing increasingly sophisticated weapons at each other across a hellscape of mud, barbed wire, and death. Those are machine guns, Kyra said, her voice hollow. Automated weapons capable of firing hundreds of rounds per minute. And those are artillery cannons. They are throwing explosive shells across distances of dozens of kilometers. Vex watched in stunned silence as the data showed human armies hurling millions of artillery shells at each other in single battles. How many casualties? He asked, though he dreaded the answer. The Battle of the Somme, Kyra read from her console, resulted in over 1 million casualties. In a single battle, Captain. One battle. That's impossible, Brix protested. No species could sustain losses like that and continue fighting. They didn't just continue fighting, Kyra replied, scrolling through more data. They fought for 4 years. The total death toll for their First World War was approximately 17 million people. The number hung in the air like a toxic cloud. 17 million. Most civilized species had total populations smaller than humanity's casualties from a single conflict. But surely that taught them the futility of large-scale warfare, Vex said desperately. Surely after experiencing such devastation, they would have learned to resolve conflicts peacefully. The scanner beeped again, loading data from just 20 years later. "Oh, you sweet, naive fool," Kyra muttered, and for the first time since Vex had known her, there was genuine sympathy in her voice. They had a Second World War. The screen exploded with images that made their previous discoveries look like children playing in a sandbox. Massive tank battles, aerial bombardments that could level entire cities, and industrial facilities dedicated to nothing but the production of death. "The scale," Brix whispered, her form now a sickly yellow color. "The scale of this it's beyond comprehension. 50 to 80 million casualties," Kyra reported, her voice completely flat now. "They improved their killing efficiency by nearly 400% in just 2 decades. "How?" Vex asked. "How is that even possible?" "Innovation," Kyra replied, and the word came out like a curse. "They didn't just repeat their previous war. They improved it. Better weapons, better tactics, better logistics. They turned warfare into a science." The screen showed images of something called the Holocaust, and Kyra had to stop reading the data aloud. The systematic, industrial approach to genocide was beyond anything in their database of known atrocities. "They built factories," she finally managed to say. "They built factories specifically designed for killing people, not weapons factories. Killing factories." Brix made a sound that no member of her species had ever made before. It was the sound of someone's worldview completely shattering. But the scanner wasn't finished with them yet. "Oh! And then they invented this," Kyra said, bringing up footage of a mushroom cloud rising over a human city. "What is that?" Vex asked, though something deep in his primitive brain was screaming warnings. "Nuclear weapons," Kyra replied. "They figured out how to split atoms and use the resulting energy to delete entire cities from existence." The screen showed before and after images of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where once there had been thriving urban centers. Now there was nothing but ash and rubble. "They used them," Rick said in disbelief. "They actually used them. On their own species." "Twice," Kyra added. "They used them twice. And then, just to make sure everyone understood what they were capable of, they built thousands more." Vex felt his eye stalks beginning to retract involuntarily. This was his species' natural response to encountering an apex predator. "The energy output of their largest nuclear weapon," Kyra continued, her voice now completely mechanical, was equivalent to 50 million tons of conventional explosives. 50 million tons, Captain. They built bombs that could destroy entire regions. But they stopped there, right? Brix asked desperately. Surely they realized they had gone too far. Kyra laughed, and it was the most terrifying sound any of them had ever heard. Oh, they were just getting started. After they figured out how to split atoms, they learned how to fuse them. Hydrogen bombs, 1,000 times more powerful than the weapons they used to end their Second World War. The data kept flowing, showing test after test of increasingly powerful weapons. Islands vaporized, atolls turned to glass, the very air itself turned into plasma. They poisoned their own atmosphere with radiation, Kyra continued, her professional demeanor finally cracking. They contaminated their own planet just to test bigger and bigger bombs. And then they started putting them on rockets. Rockets? Vex's voice cracked. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, Kyra replied. They can deliver nuclear destruction to any point on their planet within 30 minutes. They built enough of them to end their own civilization several times over. Brix's form was now shifting through colors that didn't have names in any galactic language. They built the capacity to commit planetary suicide, she whispered. And they called it strategy. The Cold War, Kyra read from her console, though her voice was barely audible now. They spent decades pointing these weapons at each other, always seconds away from ending their entire species. And they called it peace. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's systems and the quiet sound of Kyra's breathing becoming increasingly rapid and shallow. Kyra, Vex asked gently. I can't, she said suddenly, standing up from her console. I can't process any more of this. Captain, these beings spent the 20th century perfecting the art of industrial-scale slaughter. They turned killing into an assembly line process. They built weapons that could crack planets. Her large eyes were now wider than Vex had ever seen them. And this was 50 years ago. Captain, what have they accomplished since then? As if summoned by her words, the scanner pinged again, indicating it was ready to display data from more recent decades. None of them moved to activate it. The silence stretched for several long minutes. Finally, Vex cleared his throat, or made the Zolonian equivalent of that sound, which was more like a hydraulic system releasing pressure. We have to keep going, he said quietly. We need to know what we are dealing with. Do we, though? Brix asked, her form now a nervous shade of purple with green spots. I mean, really, do we need to know? Can't we just mark this system as potentially hazardous and move on? We are explorers, Vex replied, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. This is what we do. Besides, maybe they learned from their mistakes. Maybe they evolved past this phase. Kyra had returned to her console, though her hands were shaking as she activated the next data sequence, initiating scan of the period from 1945 to 1990, she announced, their post-World War era. The screen flickered to life, showing what appeared to be a map of their planet divided into two distinct color zones. Well, this looks organized, Vex said hopefully. See? They have clearly established some sort of peaceful territorial division. Those aren't peace zones, Captain, Kyra said, her voice already taking on that hollow tone again. Those are opposing military alliances. The humans split their entire planet into two armed camps and then spent 45 years preparing to annihilate each other. But they didn't actually fight, Brix pointed out. No direct conflict between the major powers. That shows restraint, right? Oh, they fought, Kyra replied, pulling up data on something called the Korean War. They just used other people's countries as battlefields. Look at this, they called them proxy wars. They would arm opposing sides in smaller conflicts and let them destroy each other while the major powers sat back and kept score. The screen showed conflict after conflict, Vietnam, Afghanistan, numerous African nations, Central American countries. Humans funding and arming different sides, turning local disputes into meat grinders. It's brilliant in a horrifying way, Brix admitted reluctantly. They figured out how to fight wars without technically fighting wars. They externalized all the destruction while maintaining their industrial capacity. And the nuclear weapons? Vex asked, dreading the answer. Oh, they kept building those too, Kyra said, bringing up stockpile numbers. At the peak of their Cold War, they had approximately 70,000 nuclear warheads between the two major powers. 70,000, Vex repeated numbly. 70,000 planet-killing weapons. Actually, Captain, each warhead could only destroy a city, Kyra corrected. But they built enough to destroy every major population center on their planet several times over. They called it mutually assured destruction. They weaponized suicide, Brix whispered. They made planetary annihilation into a strategic doctrine. The screen shifted to show massive underground bunkers, submarine fleets carrying nuclear missiles, and something called the Strategic Defense Initiative. What's that last one? Vex asked, pointing at images of satellites and laser systems. Space-based weapons, Kyra replied, and for the first time her voice carried a note of genuine terror. They started militarizing space itself. Vex felt his eye stalks retract so far they nearly disappeared into his skull. Space weapons? Orbital bombardment platforms, anti-satellite missiles, kinetic strike weapons, Kyra read from the data. They looked at the infinite void of space and decided it needed more ways to kill people. But surely these were just theoretical concepts, Brix said desperately. Proposals that never went anywhere. Some were theoretical, Kyra agreed. Others were not. They actually deployed several anti-satellite weapons systems. And look at this. Their strategic defense initiative included plans for particle beam weapons, chemical lasers, and kinetic interceptors. They wanted to turn their entire orbital space into a weapons platform, Vex said, his voice rising in pitch. They looked at the stars and saw artillery emplacements. The scanner continued pulling data, showing the development of stealth technology, precision-guided munitions, and something called psychological warfare. Psychological warfare? Brix asked. They learned how to weaponize information, Kyra explained. Propaganda, disinformation, cultural manipulation. They figured out how to destroy their enemies' will to fight without firing a shot. That's actually quite sophisticated, Vex admitted grudgingly. It gets worse, Kyra continued. They developed something called guerrilla tactics. Small groups of fighters using hit-and-run attacks, improvised explosives, and asymmetrical warfare. The screen showed footage of various insurgency movements, with humans demonstrating an alarming creativity and finding new ways to cause maximum disruption with minimal resources. They weaponized ordinary objects, Kyra said, scrolling through images. Vehicles became bombs, communication systems became recruitment tools, civilian infrastructure became military targets. They turned their own cities into battlefields. And they shared these techniques, Brix added, reading supplementary data. They wrote manuals on guerrilla warfare and distributed them globally. They democratized military expertise. X was beginning to hyperventilate, a condition that in Zolonians sounded like a balloon animal being made by someone having a seizure. Captain, are you all right? Brix asked. No, Vex replied honestly. No, I am not all right. These beings have spent the last century developing increasingly sophisticated ways to destroy each other, and now they are moving into space. As if summoned by his fears, the scanner brought up data on human space programs. Oh good, Kyra said with bitter sarcasm. Let's see what they did when they finally escaped their planet's gravity well. The screen showed the launch of something called Sputnik, followed by human space missions, moon landings, and space stations. Well, this actually looks peaceful, Brix said hopefully. Scientific exploration, international cooperation. Keep reading, Kyra said grimly. Military applications of space technology, Brix read, her voice growing smaller. Reconnaissance satellites, communication networks for military coordination, GPS systems for precision targeting. They militarized space exploration, Vex said, his worst fears confirmed. They turned every advancement in space technology into a potential weapon. Look at this, Kyra said, bringing up more recent data. Current human space capabilities include orbital surveillance networks, precision navigation systems, real-time global communications, and, oh, this is interesting, kinetic bombardment concepts. Kinetic bombardment? Vex asked weakly. Dropping tungsten rods from orbit, Kyra explained. No explosives needed. Just use gravity and velocity to create weapons with the destructive power of nuclear bombs, but none of the radiation. They weaponized physics itself, Brix said in awe. They looked at the fundamental forces of the universe and thought, how can we use this to kill people more efficiently? The scanner pinged again, bringing up even more recent data. Current human space programs include plans for asteroid mining, Mars colonization, and Kyra's voice trailed off. And what? Vex demanded. Military space doctrine? She whispered. Eerie. They are developing strategies for warfare in space itself. Vex stood up so quickly he nearly fell over. They are going to militarize the entire galaxy, he said, pacing back and forth across the bridge. These beings spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other, and now they are taking those skills to the stars. Captain, Brix said gently, maybe we should contact the Galactic Council. This seems like something they should know about. Yes, Vex agreed, his voice cracking with panic. Yes, we need to warn everyone. We need to tell them that there's a species of hyper-violent, technologically advanced predators who are about to achieve interstellar flight. He turned to stare at the beautiful blue world on the screen, and for the first time, its peaceful appearance seemed less like serenity and more like the calm before a storm. How long until they develop faster than light travel? He asked. Kyra consulted her projections. Based on their current rate of technological advancement, possibly within the next 50 to 100 years. 50 years, Vex repeated. We have 50 years before these beings are loose in the galaxy. The thought hung in the air like a death sentence. Somewhere on that beautiful blue world, the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever produced was preparing to reach for the stars. And they were bringing 10,000 years of accumulated expertise in violence with them. The scanner's final ping echoed across the bridge like a funeral bell. Kyra's hands hesitated over the controls for the contemporary data scan. Maybe we should stop here, she suggested weakly. We have enough information to file a preliminary report. No, Vex said, his voice now carrying the grim determination of someone who had accepted his fate. We need to see their current capabilities. Show me what humanity is doing right now. The screen filled with images that made their previous discoveries seem quaint by comparison. Instead of the primitive rocket technology they had glimpsed earlier, they were now looking at sophisticated space stations, reusable launch vehicles, and something that made Vex's blood run cold, a permanent human presence in space. They are already up there, Brix whispered, pointing at footage of the International Space Station. They are living in space, working in space. And look at this, they are planning missions to other worlds in their solar system. Colonization initiatives, Kyra read from the current data stream, asteroid mining operations, lunar base construction. Captain, they are not just reaching for space. They are planning to conquer it. The scanner pulled up more recent footage showing private companies launching rockets as routinely as Vex's people delivered mail. What had once been the exclusive domain of major governments was now being handled by corporations. They have commercialized space access, Vex said, his voice hollow. They have turned interplanetary travel into a business venture. And look at the launch frequency, Brix added, her gelatinous form now a nauseating shade of brown. They are putting hundreds of satellites into orbit every year. Their entire planet is surrounded by a network of surveillance and communication systems. Surveillance, Kyra repeated, pulling up more detailed data. Captain, they can monitor any point on their planet's surface in real time. They have imaging satellites with resolution down to individual humans. Military applications? Vex asked, though he already knew the answer. The extensive, Kyra confirmed. Global positioning for precision weapons, real-time battlefield intelligence, secure military communications. They have turned their orbital space into the ultimate high ground. The beautiful blue world on their screens suddenly looked different. What they had initially seen as a peaceful paradise now revealed itself as a heavily monitored, militarized fortress. The swirling white clouds that had seemed so serene were now clearly visible as cover for a species that had weaponized their own sky. "We need to contact the Council," Vex said suddenly. "Right now. This is a galactic emergency." Within minutes, the Harmony's light had established communication with the Galactic Council chambers. The main screen split into multiple windows showing representatives from a dozen different species, yet all of whom looked remarkably calm considering they were about to learn about the most dangerous beings in known space. Captain Vex greeted Counselor Thane, an elderly Arcturian whose blue skin and 3 eyes gave him a naturally peaceful appearance. "This is highly irregular. Emergency sessions are reserved for genuine threats to galactic security." "With respect, Counselor," Vex replied, "this is exactly that kind of threat." He gestured to Kyra, who began transmitting their findings to the Council. The initial reaction was predictable, polite interest followed by growing concern, then alarm, and finally something approaching panic. "This cannot be accurate," declared Counselor Zara, a crystalline being from the outer systems whose species had never experienced warfare. "No single species could be responsible for this level of systematic violence." "The data has been verified multiple times," Kyra replied. "These humans have spent their entire recorded history perfecting the art of organized destruction." Counselor Blex, representing the militant Corvan Empire, leaned forward with what might have been interest. The Corvans were considered the most warlike species in the Council, which was saying something given that they had once conquered 3-star systems before being diplomatically convinced to stop. "These weapons they call nuclear bombs," Blex said, his voice carrying a note of professional curiosity. "How many do they currently possess?" "Approximately 13,000 active warheads," Kyra answered, "with delivery systems capable of reaching any target on their planet within 30 minutes. The Council chamber fell silent. Even the Corvans, who took pride in their military prowess, had never possessed enough firepower to sterilize their own homeworld. 13,000, Counselor Thane repeated slowly. "And they built these weapons to use against each other?" "Their strategic doctrine is based on the threat of mutual annihilation," Vex confirmed. "They have maintained peace by making war too terrible to contemplate." "That's actually quite sophisticated," admitted Counselor Urix, a representative from the Scientific Coalition. "A deterrence system based on overwhelming destructive capacity." "Sophisticated," Brix interrupted, her form shifting to an agitated purple. "They have spent centuries developing new ways to kill each other, and now they are moving into space. In 50 years, maybe less, they will have interstellar capabilities. And when they do," Vex added grimly, "they will bring 10,000 years of military experience with them." The Council erupted into what could generously be called discussion but sounded more like barely controlled panic. Multiple species began talking at once, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of fear and confusion. "We must destroy them before they leave their system," declared Counselor Blex. "A preemptive strike while they are still planet-bound." "Absolutely not," countered Thane. "We don't attack civilizations for crimes they haven't committed." "Haven't committed?" Zara's crystalline form flickered with agitation. "Did you not hear the casualty figures? This species has been committing genocide against itself for millennia." "But they are still alive," pointed out Urix. "Their population is actually increasing. Perhaps their violence is part of their evolutionary strategy." "Evolutionary strategy?" Brix exclaimed. "They built factories to kill people. They invented diseases specifically to use as weapons. They have contaminated their own planet with radiation from weapons testing. And yet they survive," Urix continued calmly. "Perhaps this tendency toward violence is what made them so adaptable." "Adaptable," Vex repeated with bitter laughter. "They are not adaptable. They are a species of apex predators who have run out of things to hunt on their own world." "We could attempt peaceful contact," suggested Thane, "to guide them toward more civilized behavior." With respect, Counselor Kyra interjected, their idea of peaceful contact might involve studying our weaknesses. Then what do you propose? Thane asked. We cannot simply ignore them. Quarantine, Blex suggested. Surround their system with monitoring stations, prevent them from developing faster-than-light travel. For how long? Zara asked. Forever? Until they die out naturally. If necessary, Blex replied grimly. That could take thousands of years, Yurix pointed out. And there's no guarantee they won't eventually break through any containment we establish. Vex listened to the debate with growing dread. These were the most advanced, peaceful, and wise species in the galaxy, and they were talking about everything from genocide to eternal imprisonment. The mere existence of humanity had reduced the Council to the same level of strategic thinking that had characterized human conflicts for centuries. There's something else, Kyra said quietly, interrupting the debate. Something I haven't mentioned yet. The Council chamber fell silent. Their space technology isn't just advancing, she continued. It's accelerating. Based on their current rate of progress, my initial estimate of 50 years was overly optimistic. How optimistic? Vex asked, though he dreaded the answer. They could achieve faster-than-light travel within the next 20 years, Kyra said. Maybe less. The silence that followed was the sound of galactic civilization contemplating its own mortality. In 20 years, Thane said finally. We have 20 years to decide the fate of the most dangerous species the galaxy has ever produced. As the Council continued its increasingly desperate debate, Vex stared at the beautiful blue world on his screen and realized that its peaceful appearance wasn't just deceptive. It was camouflage. The most lethal predators in nature, after all, were often the most beautiful. The Galactic Council chamber had devolved into something resembling a cosmic debate between terrified children arguing about whether to poke a sleeping monster with a stick. The irony that the galaxy's most advanced civilizations were now behaving with all the strategic wisdom of frightened herbivores was not lost on Vex. I maintain that immediate action is necessary, Counselor Blex insisted, his Corvan features set in grim determination. We mobilize the combined fleet and glass their planet before they can escape their gravity well. You are talking about genocide, Thane replied, his blue skin darkening with disapproval. The extermination of an entire species based on what they might do. Based on what they have done, Blex corrected. This isn't speculation, Thane. These beings have been practicing galactic-scale warfare for 10,000 years. They have just been practicing on each other. Counselor Zara's crystalline form flickered with agitation. The Corvan approach is barbaric, but the alternative is equally troubling. If we attempt containment, what happens when they inevitably break free? If they break free, Yurix corrected. We could establish a technological barrier, prevent them from developing faster-than-light capabilities. How? Brix interjected from her position at the communication console. These humans have shown a remarkable talent for turning any technology into a weapon. What makes you think they won't turn our containment systems against us? The debate raged for several more minutes, with various council members proposing increasingly desperate solutions. Some suggested relocating all nearby civilizations. Others proposed seeding humanity's development with false scientific information to slow their progress. One particularly creative counselor from the far rim suggested introducing a plague that would reduce human intelligence to manageable levels. It was during this increasingly unhinged discussion that Kyra made a discovery that changed everything. Captain? She said quietly, her voice cutting through the council's debate. I think we have a problem. A bigger problem than a species of genocidal apex predators developing interstellar travel? Vex asked. Yes, Kyra replied, her voice now completely flat. I have been analyzing their current communication networks, trying to get a better understanding of their technological capabilities. She paused, and the pause stretched long enough that even the council members stopped arguing. Kyra, Vex prompted gently. They know about us, she said. The words hung in the space between them like a death sentence. I'm sorry, what? Thane asked, his three eyes blinking in sequence. They know about extraterrestrial life, Kyra elaborated, bringing up data on her screen. Not just theoretical knowledge. They have government agencies dedicated to investigating what they call unidentified aerial phenomena. They have military protocols for contact with non-human intelligence. That's not necessarily concerning, Urix said hopefully. Many species develop theoretical frameworks for contact before actually encountering other civilizations. It's not theoretical, Kyra continued, scrolling through more data. They have documented encounters, recorded evidence. There are government reports acknowledging that their military has observed craft with capabilities beyond their current technology. The council chamber fell completely silent. How long? Blex asked, his voice carrying a note of professional respect that was somehow more terrifying than his earlier aggression. Based on the documentation, they have been aware of extraterrestrial visitation for at least 70 years, Kyra replied. Possibly longer. 70 years, Vex repeated numbly. They have known about us for 70 years, and they have spent that time developing weapons that could crack planets. It gets worse, Kyra added, because apparently the universe had a sense of humor, and it was actively malicious. Their response to learning about extraterrestrial life wasn't fear or wonder. It was immediate militarization. She brought up documents from something called the Pentagon, showing military research into advanced propulsion systems, energy weapons, and what humans euphemistically termed aerospace defense initiatives. They saw evidence of superior technology, Kyra continued, and their first instinct was to figure out how to fight it. Of course it was, Brix muttered. Of course their response to discovering a galaxy full of advanced civilizations was to start working on better ways to kill them. This changes everything, Thane said slowly. If they already know about extraterrestrial life, then any contact we make would be interpreted as a threat assessment, Blex finished. They'd be studying us the entire time, looking for weaknesses. They have had 70 years to prepare for this moment, Zara added, her crystalline form now pulsing with what could only be described as terror. 70 years to develop strategies for fighting enemies with superior technology. And they have been doing it while pretending to be a primitive, isolated species, Urix noted with grudging admiration. That level of strategic deception is impressive. Impressive? Vex's voice cracked. They have been conducting psychological warfare against the entire galaxy without us even knowing we were under attack. The implications began to sink in. Every assumption they had made about humanity's development, every assessment of their capabilities, and every strategic consideration had been based on the belief that they were dealing with a species that was unaware of galactic civilization. What if their entire space program is military? Brix asked suddenly. What if everything we have interpreted as scientific exploration is actually reconnaissance? Those satellites we observed, Kyra said, pulling up more data. The ones we thought were for communication and navigation. What if they are also surveillance systems designed to monitor approaches to their planet? They have turned their entire solar system into a fortress, Vex realized. And we have been sitting here observing them like they are specimens in a laboratory. While they have been observing us right back, Blex added grimly. Counselor Thane's normally calm demeanor had cracked completely. If humanity has been aware of galactic civilization for 70 years, and their response has been to weaponize everything they can get their hands on, then we are not dealing with a potential threat. We are dealing with an active one, Blex concluded. They are not preparing to enter galactic society. They are preparing to conquer it. And they have had 7 decades to study our technology, our psychology, our weaknesses, Zara added. The beautiful blue world on the main screen suddenly looked different again. What had once appeared to be a peaceful planet, then a militarized fortress, now revealed itself as something far more sinister, a training ground where the galaxy's most dangerous predators had spent 70 years preparing for interstellar warfare. How long until they make their move? Thane asked quietly. Based on their current trajectory, Kyra replied, they could have interstellar capabilities within the next 20 years. 20 years, Blex repeated. 20 years until the most violent species in galactic history arrives at our doorstep, armed with 7 decades of intelligence about our civilizations and weapons we can't even imagine. As the Council sat in stunned silence, Vex stared at Earth and realized they weren't looking at a potential problem that needed to be managed. They were looking at the galaxy's new apex predator, and it had been watching them the entire time. After 3 hours of increasingly desperate debate, the Galactic Council reached what could charitably be called a decision. It was the kind of decision that desperate beings make when all their options are terrible, and they choose the one that seems least likely to result in immediate extinction. "We make contact," Thane announced, his voice carrying the weight of galactic civilization's collective resignation. "Peaceful contact. We approach them as benevolent guides, offer them membership in galactic society, and hope we can influence their development toward more civilized behavior." "You want to negotiate with a species that spent the last century perfecting industrial genocide?" Vex asked incredulously. "Do you have a better suggestion?" Thane replied. "Because the alternatives are starting an interstellar war with beings who have been preparing for exactly that scenario for 70 years and are waiting 20 years for them to come to us. At least if we make the first move, we control the initial contact scenario," Urix added. "We can present ourselves as peaceful benefactors rather than potential threats." Vex listened to this reasoning with the growing certainty that they were about to make the worst mistake in galactic history. But the alternatives were even more terrifying. "Very well," he said finally. "The Harmony's light will approach Earth and initiate first contact protocols." "Peaceful protocols only," Thane emphasized. "No weapons, no shields, minimal crew. We want them to see us as friends, not invaders." As the council session ended, Vex found himself staring at Earth's surface and wondering if this was what prey felt like when it voluntarily walked into a predator's den. The approach to Earth took 6 standard hours. 6 hours for Vex to contemplate every possible way this could go wrong, and to realize that he hadn't thought of nearly enough possibilities. Initiating standard first contact transmission, Brix announced, her gelatinous form now a nauseating shade of green that Vex had never seen before. Broadcasting on all frequencies. "Greetings, people of Earth. We come in peace, representing the Galactic Council of Civilized Worlds. We wish to welcome you into the greater galactic community." The response came faster than anyone had expected. "Harmony's light, this is Houston Flight Control. We have been expecting you." The words hit the bridge like a physical blow. Kyra actually fell out of her chair. "Expecting us?" Vex croaked. The human voice continued with what sounded like practiced professionalism. "Please proceed to coordinates 30 degrees north, 95 degrees west, altitude 50 kilometers. You will be met by an escort." "An escort," Brix whispered. As if summoned by her words, their sensors detected multiple craft approaching from Earth's surface. Sleek, angular vessels that moved with a grace and speed that made Vex's stomach lurch. "Those aren't chemical rockets," Kyra said, her voice barely audible. "Captain, those craft are using propulsion technology that shouldn't exist." "The humans have been busy," came a new voice over the communication channel. This one was different, carrying an authority that made Vex's eye stalks retract involuntarily. "Who am I speaking with?" Vex asked. "General Marcus Webb, United Earth Defense Command," the voice replied. "And you are Captain Vex of the ship Harmony's Light, representing the Galactic Council. We have been monitoring your survey for the past several days." Several days. They had been watching the aliens watch them. "How?" Brix asked weakly. "Did you really think a species that spent 70 years preparing for contact wouldn't notice a large alien vessel sitting at the edge of our solar system?" Webb's voice carried a note of amusement that was somehow more terrifying than anger would have been. "You have been observing us," Vex said, though it wasn't really a question. "Captain, we have been observing you since you entered our solar system. We have been listening to your communications, analyzing your technology, and assessing your capabilities." There was a pause. "We have also been rather entertained by your reaction to our history." The alien crew exchanged glances of pure terror. "You heard our conversations?" Kyra asked. "Every word," Webb confirmed. "Your encryption is adequate by galactic standards, I'm sure. But we have had some time to work on code-breaking techniques." "How much time?" Vex asked, though he was beginning to suspect he knew the answer. "Well, that depends on how you count," Webb replied. "If you mean how long we have been specifically preparing for contact with your particular species, about 6 months. If you mean how long we have been preparing for contact with galactic civilization in general, about 70 years. 70 years, Brix repeated numbly. "Give or take," Webb said cheerfully. "We have been aware of various galactic civilizations for quite some time. Your survey missions aren't exactly subtle. Large ships, broad-spectrum sensors, predictable flight patterns. We have been tracking Galactic Council activities for decades." The implications hit Vex like a meteor strike. "You have been monitoring other survey missions." "Captain, we have been monitoring everything," Webb replied. "Trade routes, diplomatic missions, military patrols. We have a fairly comprehensive understanding of galactic civilization's structure, capabilities, and weaknesses." "Weaknesses," Vex repeated, his voice cracking. "Every civilization has them," Webb said conversationally. "Yours are particularly interesting. You have achieved remarkable technological advancement, but you have done it through cooperation and peaceful development. Very admirable. Also very predictable." "Predictable how?" Kyra asked, though she sounded like she didn't want to know the answer. "Your response to us, for instance," Webb explained. "We calculated a 93% probability that upon discovering our history, you would either attempt immediate contact to guide our development or recommend preemptive military action." "You calculated our response?" Brix stammered. "We have been running psychological profiles on galactic species for decades," Webb continued. "Game theory, strategic analysis, behavioral prediction models. It's amazing what you can learn about someone by watching how they react to carefully presented information." The horrible truth began to dawn on Vex. "Our entire survey, everything we discovered about your history, it was curated specifically for your consumption," Webb confirmed. "The events were real enough. But we made sure you found exactly what we wanted you to find, in exactly the order we wanted you to find it." "You have been manipulating us," Kyra said, her voice hollow. "We have been conducting a psychological warfare operation against galactic civilization for the past 70 years, Webb corrected. "This conversation isn't first contact, Captain. This is the conclusion of the longest intelligence-gathering operation in human history." Vex felt his worldview crumble completely. "What do you want?" "Want?" Webb sounded genuinely puzzled. "Captain, we don't want anything from you. You have already given us everything we needed." "Which is?" "Information," Webb replied. 70 years of intelligence on galactic civilization's military capabilities, political structures, technological limitations, and psychological profiles. You have been wonderfully thorough." "But why?" Brix asked desperately. "Why go to all this trouble?" There was a long pause before Webb answered, and when he did, his voice carried a note of something that might have been pity. "Because, my dear alien friends, we learned a very long time ago that the best way to win a war is to make sure your enemies defeat themselves before the fighting even starts." As Webb's words sank in, Vex realized with crystal clarity that humanity hadn't been preparing to enter galactic civilization. They had been preparing to replace it. And the galaxy's most advanced species had just spent 70 years helping them do it. 6 months after what galactic historians would eventually record as the day we realized we were idiots, Vex sat in his quarters aboard the Harmony's Light, staring at a glass of Alterian whiskey that he couldn't bring himself to drink. The ship was docked at Galactic Council Station Alpha, where an emergency session had been in continuous operation since their return from Earth. The debates had evolved from what do we do about humanity to what do we do now that humanity is obviously in charge. The answer, as it turned out, was whatever humanity wanted them to do. It had taken less than a week after first contact for the humans to demonstrate just how thoroughly they had infiltrated galactic civilization. Trade routes that had operated peacefully for centuries suddenly experienced mysterious technical difficulties. Communication networks developed inexplicable glitches. Military installations found their security systems behaving in interesting and creative ways. Nothing violent. Nothing overtly threatening. Just a gentle reminder that humanity had been watching, learning, and preparing for a very long time. Captain? Brix entered his quarters, her gelatinous form now permanently settled into a dull gray color that suggested she had given up on life entirely. The Council is requesting your presence for the latest session. Let me guess, Vex said without looking up. Another proposal for how to peacefully coexist with our new human neighbors? Actually, the humans sent a representative, Brix replied. She's been explaining their terms for what they call galactic integration. Vex finally took a sip of his whiskey. It tasted like defeat. Terms? Nothing unreasonable, Brix said quickly. Open trade agreements, technology sharing, mutual defense pacts. Very civilized, really. How generous of them, Vex muttered. The irony wasn't lost on him. The galaxy's most peaceful, advanced civilizations were now essentially vassals to a species they had initially dismissed as primitive, and the humans were being perfectly polite about it. There is one other thing, Brix added hesitantly. The human representative mentioned that they are planning to expand their survey operations. Survey operations? Apparently they are interested in exploring regions beyond Council space, Brix explained. Looking for other developing civilizations that might benefit from guidance. Vex closed his eyes and tried not to think about what human-style guidance might look like for truly primitive species. Captain, Brix said gently, do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had just marked their system as uninhabited and moved on? Vex considered this for a moment, then started laughing. It wasn't a pleasant sound. Brix, he said finally, if we hadn't found them, they would have found us eventually. And they would have been even better prepared. As if to emphasize his point, the ship's communication system activated, broadcasting the daily message that had become routine since first contact. Good morning, galactic neighbors. This is Earth Defense Command with your daily reminder that we come in peace. We are here to help, and resistance is futile. Have a wonderful day. Vex raised his glass in a mock toast to the beautiful blue world that had turned out to be the galaxy's most successful predator. Welcome to the new reality, he said to no one in particular. Somewhere in the vast cosmos, humanity was already reaching toward the next star system, carrying 10,000 years of strategic thinking and 70 years of galactic intelligence. The universe would never be the same. And frankly, it probably never had a chance.